The Arizona sun, a molten coin in the vast expanse of morning sky, cast long shadows across the packed parking lot. Danielle Merriweather adjusted the grip on the bouquet of roses, their crimson a stark contrast against the worn fabric of her dress. Each petal, carefully chosen, represented a milestone, a hurdle cleared, a silent victory in the marathon that had been Jalen's life and hers by extension. The scent, a heady mix of dew and earth and something indefinably hopeful, filled her nostrils, momentarily eclipsing the faint metallic tang of exhaust fumes. She inhaled deeply, a slow, deliberate breath meant to anchor her, to quiet the hummingbird flutter in her chest. This was it, graduation day, a day she'd dared to dream of, but often feared might remain just a dream. She ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of her son's graduation gift tucked inside her purse. A vintage compass, a symbol of his journey and a reminder of the direction he always seemed to possess, even when she herself felt lost. She knew how to stretch $1, how to turn scraps into feasts, hand-me-downs into fashion statements, and a cramped apartment into a home. And she knew how to hold her head high when folks tried to make her feel small, their judgments like pebbles thrown against the fortress she'd built around her heart. Today, though, that fortress felt fragile, a thin shell around a core of raw emotion. Pride, fierce and unwavering, mingled with a bittersweet ache, a whisper of all the years gone by, the sacrifices made, the silent battles fought. The parking lot buzzed with anticipation, a cacophony of car doors slamming, excited chatter, and the click-clack of heels on asphalt. Danielle smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her dress, her movements precise, almost ritualistic. Every detail mattered today. Every gesture, every word, a testament to the unspoken promise she'd made to her son all those years ago, that she would be there, a steadfast presence in a world that often felt indifferent. The walk to the stadium felt surreal, each step echoing not just on the paved path, but in the chambers of her heart. The crowd thickened, a vibrant tapestry of colors and sounds. Danielle clutched her ticket, a small rectangular piece of cardstock that held more weight than its flimsy structure suggested. Row 3, seat 12. Jalen had insisted. Front and center, Ma, he'd said, his voice gruff but his eyes brimming with an affection that warmed her from the inside out. You deserve the best seat in the house. As she neared the entrance, she noticed the increased presence of security personnel, their stern faces and stiff postures a stark contrast to the festive atmosphere. A flicker of unease danced at the edges of her composure. Ticket, ma'am. The guard's voice, devoid of warmth, snapped her back to reality. Danielle presented her ticket, her hand surprisingly steady. The guard scrutinized it, his brow furrowed. Another guard, a younger woman with a tight-lipped expression, stepped closer. Can I see your ID? The request, seemingly innocuous, hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Danielle felt a prickle of irritation, a tightening in her chest. She complied, handing over her driver's license, the plastic feeling brittle in her grasp. The guards exchanged a look, a silent communication that sent a chill down Danielle's spine. There seems to be a discrepancy, the first guard said, his tone laced with an almost imperceptible condescension. This ticket, he trailed off, his gaze sweeping over Danielle, taking in her worn dress, her sensible shoes, the quiet dignity that radiated from her despite the rising tide of anxiety within. Doesn't seem to match your profile. The unspoken words hung in the air, thick with prejudice. Danielle's breath hitched. I assure you, she said, her voice calm despite the tremor in her hands. This is my ticket. My son, Jalen Merriweather, reserved this seat for me. The guards remained impassive. We'll need to verify that, the female guard said, her voice clipped, her eyes fixed on some point just beyond Danielle's shoulder. The undercurrent of disrespect, the subtle but unmistakable insinuation that she didn't belong here, ignited a spark of defiance within her. Years of facing similar veiled judgments had hardened her, taught her to stand her ground, to refuse to be diminished. "My son is graduating with honors in engineering," she stated, her voice gaining strength, each word a carefully placed stone in the wall she was rebuilding around her heart. "He's a veteran, a Navy SEAL." The words hung in the air, a challenge, a subtle shift in the power dynamic. The guards hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing their faces. Before they could respond, a deep voice boomed from behind her. "Everything all right, ma'am?" 6 figures, tall and imposing in their civilian attire, materialized seemingly out of nowhere. Danielle recognized them instantly. Jalen's former teammates. The men who had become like brothers to her son, their faces etched with the same unwavering loyalty and quiet strength that she'd come to admire. Hawk, his eyes sharp and assessing, stepped forward. Beside him, Trevor Banks, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a steely resolve, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "These gentlemen bothering you, Danielle?" he asked, his voice low but laced with an unmistakable warning. The guards, now visibly uncomfortable, stammered something about verifying credentials and seating arrangements. "This is Mrs. Merriweather," Hawk intervened, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Jalen's mother. She's exactly where she's supposed to be." The arrival of the SEALs, their silent but powerful presence, had shifted the atmosphere. A ripple of murmurs spread through the nearby crowd. A middle-aged woman in a navy blue dress spoke up, her voice trembling with indignation. "This is disgraceful. How dare you treat this woman with such disrespect?" A young man in a green graduation gown echoed her sentiment. "She's here to celebrate her son's graduation. Leave her alone." The tide had turned. The guards, now facing not just Danielle's quiet defiance, but a collective wave of disapproval, backed down, their faces flushed. A woman in a maroon blazer, clearly a member of the university staff, hurried over, apologizing profusely. The incident, captured on several cell phones, quickly went viral. Within hours, Chancellor Rarin himself contacted Jalen, expressing his sincere apologies and promising a full investigation. But for Danielle, the apologies, the viral video, the public outcry, all faded into the background. As she finally took her seat in row 3, seat 12, her heart swelled not with anger or resentment, but with a profound sense of gratitude. She was surrounded by love, by loyalty, by the unwavering support of a community that had become her family. And as Jalen walked across the stage, his eyes meeting hers, a smile lighting up his face, she knew that this moment of shared triumph was worth more than all the apologies in the world. The air crackled with anticipation. 1,000 whispers, like the rustling of dry leaves, filled the vast convocation center. Danielle Merriweather inhaled deeply, the scent of polished wood and anticipation thick in the air. Sunlight streamed through the high arched windows, painting dust motes dancing in the air with an ethereal glow. She smoothed a non-existent wrinkle on her navy blue dress, the one she'd carefully chosen weeks ago, imagining this very moment. Her heart, a trapped bird fluttering against her ribs, hammered a rhythm of pride and a touch of disbelief. Jalen, her Jalen, graduating. It felt like just yesterday she was chasing him around the backyard, his small hand clutching a bright red fire truck. Now he was a man, a Navy SEAL, an engineer. A wave of something akin to awe washed over her. She found her seat, 4th row, center. Honor guests. Reserved, the small placard read. A smile played on her lips. He made sure she had the best seat in the house. Her fingers traced the embossed lettering on the program. The paper felt crisp and cool beneath her touch. The weight of it, the formality, amplified the solemnity of the occasion. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a testament to years of hard work, of sacrifice, of her son's unwavering determination. The murmur of the crowd intensified. The procession had begun. Danielle shifted in her seat, a knot of anticipation tightening in her stomach. Where was he? She scanned the rows of graduating students, their faces a blur of black gowns and eager smiles. Then she saw him, taller, broader, more assured than she remembered, but with the same mischievous glint in his eyes that had charmed her since he was a boy. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, and a warm smile spread across his face. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Relief washed over Danielle, a gentle wave calming the turbulent sea of her emotions. He was here. She was here. This was real. "Ma'am, you're going to need to move." The voice, brusque and impersonal, shattered the fragile peace Danielle had found. She blinked, turning to face the source of the interruption. Two security guards, their faces impassive, stood before her. Their uniforms, crisp and dark, seemed to absorb the light, casting shadows that mirrored the unease creeping into her heart. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, the question hanging in the air like a fragile ornament. A flicker of irritation sparked within her. Hadn't she just? Didn't they see? "This section is for special guests only," the taller guard repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. His gaze swept over her, a dismissive flick that made her feel small, insignificant. A cold dread began to spread through her limbs. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not here. Her mind raced, searching for an explanation, a reason. Was there a mistake? Had Jalen somehow forgotten? The thought pricked at her, a sharp, unexpected sting. "I am his family," she said, her voice gaining strength, a steel rod replacing the fragile glass. She held the guard's gaze, refusing to flinch. "Jalen Merriweather. That's my son." The guards exchanged a look. A flicker of something that looked suspiciously like amusement crossed the taller guard's face. "I'm afraid that doesn't qualify you to sit here, ma'am. This section is reserved for dignitaries and university officials." He gestured vaguely towards the stage. Danielle felt a flush of anger rise in her cheeks. Dignitaries? Officials? Was her presence, her love for her son, less significant than some empty title? She opened her mouth to retort, to argue, to demand to see someone in charge, but the words caught in her throat. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the guards. 6 figures tall and imposing materialized behind them. Danielle recognized the broad shoulders, the confident stance, the quiet intensity that radiated from them even in civilian clothes. Jalen's teammates. Hawk, his best friend since childhood, stood at the forefront, his eyes, usually full of easy humor, now narrowed with a chilling intensity. Beside him stood Trevor Banks, his face an impassive mask, his hands clasped behind his back. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" Hawk's voice, low and resonant, cut through the rising murmurs of the crowd. The guards turned, their faces registering surprise, then a flicker of unease. The taller guard cleared his throat. "Just a misunderstanding." This lady," Hawk interrupted, his voice still quiet but laced with steel, "is the mother of Jalen Merriweather, a Navy SEAL, and a graduating engineer from this very institution." He gestured towards Danielle with a respectful nod. "And this," he added, his gaze sweeping over the other 5 men, "are his brothers. We're here to celebrate with him, and we'll be damned if we let anyone disrespect his mother." The guards, now outnumbered and clearly outmatched, stammered something about following protocol, about assigned seating. But their voices lacked conviction, their bravado crumbling under the weight of the SEAL's silent, unwavering presence. A middle-aged woman in a navy blue dress, seated a few rows behind, spoke up, her voice trembling with indignation. "This is outrageous. This woman has every right to be here." A young man in a green graduation gown echoed her sentiment. "Yeah, leave her alone." A ripple of support spread through the crowd. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to outright condemnation. A woman in a maroon blazer, clearly a member of the university staff, hurried over, her face pale and apologetic. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Merriweather. There's been a terrible mistake. Please stay. We insist." Danielle, still slightly shaken, nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. She sat back down, the warmth of her son's friend's support enveloping her like a comforting blanket. The ceremony began, the chancellor's voice booming through the hall. But Danielle barely heard it. Her gaze was fixed on her son, her heart swelling with pride and a profound sense of gratitude. She had faced the ugliness of prejudice and emerged victorious, not because of her own strength, but because of the unwavering loyalty and love that surrounded her. Later, after the ceremony, after the hugs and congratulations, after the flurry of photos, Jalen received a call from Chancellor Raren himself, profusely apologizing for the incident. The story, captured on several cell phones, went viral, sparking outrage and prompting a formal apology from the university. But for Danielle, the true victory wasn't the public apology or the viral video. It was the look in her son's eyes, the pride and love that shone brighter than any accolade. It was the silent strength of the man who stood by her, a testament to the bonds of brotherhood forged in fire and tested in adversity. It was the realization that even in the face of injustice, there was always hope, always the possibility of redemption, always the power of standing together, united against the darkness. The crisp graduation program crinkled in Danielle's hand, the embossed university crest a cold contrast to the warmth radiating from the crowded stands. Her smile, meticulously practiced in the hotel mirror that morning, felt brittle now, a thin layer of ice over a churning sea of anxiety. She'd replayed this moment 1,000 times, Jalen striding across the stage, his face alight with accomplishment. This was his victory, a hard-won triumph carved from years of relentless dedication. First in the unforgiving crucible of the Navy SEALs, and then in the equally demanding world of academia. And she, his mother, was supposed to be here, front and center, bearing witness. But the two security guards, their postures stiff with authority, blocked her path like granite sentinels. Their questions, though polite enough on the surface, dripped with an unspoken skepticism that chilled her to the bone. Something about her, perhaps the worn fabric of her dress, perhaps the lines etched by worry around her eyes, perhaps simply the color of her skin, didn't fit their preconceived notion of who belonged in these reserved seats. The rising hum of the crowd, the expectant chatter, the rustling of graduation gowns all faded into a distant drone as her focus narrowed to these two men. "Ma'am, are you sure this is your seat?" The taller guard's voice was smooth, professional, yet Danielle heard the subtle undercurrent of doubt, a dissonance that grated against the genuine joy she'd been carrying all morning. "Yes," she responded, her voice steadier than she felt. "Section A, row 3, seat 12. My son specifically reserved this seat for me." She held up the ticket, her fingers trembling slightly, the small rectangular piece of cardstock suddenly feeling like a fragile shield against their implicit accusations. Why are they doing this? The question echoed in her mind, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of disbelief. Hadn't she earned this moment? Hadn't Jalen earned this moment and the right to share it with her? The other guard, shorter and stockier, leaned in, scrutinizing the ticket with an exaggerated thoroughness that felt deliberately condescending. "Can I see your ID, ma'am?" Danielle's stomach clenched. This was more than a simple misunderstanding. It was a subtle, insidious erosion of her dignity. She wanted to shout, to demand to be treated with the respect she deserved. But years of navigating a world that often judged her before seeing her had taught her a different kind of strength, the strength of quiet defiance. She unclipped her purse, the small metallic click echoing in the sudden hush that seemed to have fallen around them. The air thickened with unspoken tension, drawing the attention of nearby attendees. A woman in a navy blue dress, her face etched with concern, paused mid-conversation, her gaze fixed on the unfolding scene. As Danielle handed over her ID, a flicker of uncertainty crossed the taller guard's face. He compared the name on the ID to the name on the ticket, then back again. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant click of camera shutters. Someone was recording this, documenting this small, personal humiliation for the world to see. The thought sent a wave of heat rising up Danielle's neck. "Everything appears to be in order," the taller guard finally said, his voice strained. But he didn't step aside. "Then may I please sit down?" Danielle asked, her voice low but firm. "The ceremony is about to begin." "We're just following protocol, ma'am," The shorter guard interjected, his tone laced with a thinly veiled impatience. There have been reports of people sneaking into the reserve sections. Sneaking in? The words struck Danielle like a physical blow. The implication was clear, the unspoken accusation hanging heavy in the air. I didn't sneak in, she said, her voice trembling now, each word a small act of resistance. My son gave me this ticket himself. He's graduating today. He's an engineer. The last words came out almost as a whisper, a desperate attempt to justify her presence, to explain why she, a woman who didn't look like she belonged in this privileged space, had a right to be here. I understand, ma'am, the taller guard said, his eyes darting nervously towards the growing crowd of onlookers. But perhaps you could wait over there while we verify this. He gestured vaguely towards the back of the section, towards the less desirable seats, the ones shrouded in shadow. A wave of dizziness washed over Danielle. She gripped the edge of the chair, her knuckles turning white. I'm not causing trouble, she said, her voice rising slightly, fueled by a sudden surge of adrenaline. I just want to watch my son graduate. From my seat. Ma'am, please cooperate, the shorter guard insisted, his hand hovering near his radio. And that's when she said it, the words forced out by a wellspring of emotion she could no longer contain. I'm not moving until someone from the university tells me to. The words hung in the air, a challenge, a declaration of her unwavering resolve. Just then, 6 figures emerged from the crowd, their movements fluid and purposeful, their presence radiating an aura of quiet authority. 6 men, tall and powerfully built, their faces etched with a familiar blend of discipline and loyalty. Jalen's former SEAL teammates, including Hawk, his stoic face a mask of controlled fury, and Trevor Banks, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a steely resolve. They moved as one, forming a protective barrier around Danielle. The guards, visibly unnerved by their sudden appearance, instinctively took a step back. The air crackled with unspoken tension, the scene unfolding under the watchful gaze of dozens of phone cameras. A young man in a green graduation gown stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. What's going on here? He demanded, his voice ringing with youthful idealism. Leave her alone. She has a right to be here. The woman in the navy dress nodded in agreement. This is outrageous, she said, her voice trembling with anger. I'm calling the university president. The tide had turned. The guards, now outnumbered and outmaneuvered, looked bewildered, their initial confidence replaced by a dawning realization of the situation they had created. A woman in a maroon blazer, her face pale with concern, hurried towards them, her hands fluttering nervously. I'm so sorry, ma'am, she said to Danielle, her voice filled with genuine remorse. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Please, take your seat. The ceremony is about to begin. And as Danielle finally sat down, a wave of relief washed over her, so profound it almost brought her to her knees. She looked up, her eyes searching for Jalen in the sea of faces. And there he was standing at the edge of the stage, his chest swelling with pride, his eyes shining with love. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared victory. The crisp program felt slick beneath her fingers. Danielle Merriweather smoothed the edges, the embossed gold lettering a stark contrast against the navy blue. Jalen's name, printed with a flourish, was a beacon amidst the blur of other graduates. Pride, sharp and sweet, swelled in her chest, a stark contrast to the knot forming in her stomach. This moment, this culmination of years of late-night studying fueled by instant coffee and sheer grit, should have been pure joy. Yet, the 2 security guards looming over her like vultures circling a wounded animal tainted the air with an acrid scent of injustice. Ma'am, for the last time, we need to see your ticket for this section. The taller guard's voice was laced with an impatience that grated on her nerves. He tapped his foot, the rhythmic thudding echoing the unsteady beat of her heart. Inside, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions churned. Anger, hot and prickly, urged her to lash out. Fear, a cold whisper, caution restraint. But beneath it all, a deep-seated weariness settled. She'd faced this before, this subtle dismissal, this assumption of her not belonging. She swallowed, tasting the bitter tang of familiarity. "I've already shown you my ticket." Her voice, though quiet, held a tremor of steel. The shorter guard, a man with a face as bland as boiled potatoes, crossed his arms. "This ticket is for general admission. This section is reserved." He pointed to the rows of plush velvet seats, occupied by families radiating an air of privilege. Danielle recognized some of the faces, local dignitaries, wealthy donors. People whose contributions came in the form of hefty checks, not years of unwavering support and sacrifice. Danielle clenched her jaw, the program crinkling in her grip. The thought of missing Jalen's moment of triumph, of not being there to witness his hard-won victory, was a physical ache. She had envisioned this day for years. Imagine the pride on his face as he walked across the stage. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about a mother's right to witness her son's triumph, a right she had earned through sleepless nights and whispered prayers. "I was given this ticket by my son," she stated, her voice firmer now, each word a small act of defiance. "He reserved this seat for me." The lie felt like a lead weight in her stomach, but the alternative, admitting she'd swapped tickets with a kind stranger, felt even worse. This was her battle, her hill to die on. The taller guard leaned closer, his shadow falling over her. The faint scent of stale coffee and something vaguely metallic clung to him. "Look, lady," he began, his tone condescending. "We've been over this. You need to move." Just as Danielle was about to retort, a ripple of movement from the entrance caught her attention. 6 figures, tall and imposing, moved through the crowd with a quiet confidence that cut through the celebratory buzz. They were dressed in civilian clothes, but there was an undeniable aura of authority about them, a subtle synchronicity in their movements that spoke of shared experiences and unspoken bonds. The guards, momentarily distracted, turned to watch their approach. Danielle's breath hitched, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest. She recognized the lead figure, a man with a hawk-like gaze and a jawline carved from granite. Hawk. Jalen had spoken of him often, a brother in arms, a comrade forged in the crucible of shared danger. Hawk stopped before her, his eyes sharp and assessing, taking in the scene. "You okay, Ms. Merriweather?" His voice was low, a rumble that resonated with an undercurrent of steel. Danielle's heart swelled. "Hawk," she whispered, relief washing over her like a tidal wave. She hadn't realized how close she was to breaking until that moment. She managed a small, shaky smile. "I'm fine. Just a little misunderstanding." Behind Hawk, another familiar face emerged. Trevor Banks, his usual jovial expression replaced with a grin set to his mouth. He nodded in her direction, a silent acknowledgement of solidarity. The other 4 men, equally imposing, formed a semicircle around her, creating a protective barrier against the guard's scrutiny. The taller guard, his face now a shade paler, cleared his throat. "Sir, is this woman with you?" Hawk's gaze flicked to the guard, a silent challenge in its depths. "Jalen sent us," he stated, his voice devoid of any inflection. "We wanted to surprise him." But her ticket, the shorter guard stammered, his previous confidence evaporating like mist in the morning sun. Trevor stepped forward, his voice laced with a quiet menace. "She's with us," he stated, his gaze unwavering. "And if she's leaving, so are we." The 2 guards exchanged a look, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and utterly outclassed. The air, thick with tension moments before, suddenly shifted, the power dynamic irrevocably altered. The taller guard mumbled something about checking with his supervisor, his gaze darting nervously towards the growing crowd of onlookers. A middle-aged woman in a navy blue dress, her face etched with disapproval, muttered something about disgraceful and unacceptable. A young man in a green graduation gown gave Danielle a thumbs up, a silent gesture of support that warmed her more than any apology. The guards retreated, their earlier bravado replaced with a hasty retreat. Danielle, surrounded by Jalen's former teammates, felt a surge of something akin to triumph. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the mothers, all the families who had been overlooked, dismissed, and judged. A woman in a maroon blazer, her face a mask of professional concern, hurried over, apologizing profusely for the misunderstanding. She assured Danielle that the guards would be reprimanded and offered her a complimentary program, as if a glossy pamphlet could erase the sting of humiliation. But Danielle barely heard her. Her gaze was fixed on the entrance, searching for the familiar figure of her son. When Jalen finally appeared, his face alight with excitement, he stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening in surprise at the sight of his former teammates. Then, his gaze landed on her, his face softening with a mixture of love and concern. He rushed towards her, his graduation gown billowing behind him. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What happened? Are you okay?" Danielle reached out, cupping his face in her hands. "I'm fine, baby," she whispered, her voice choked with unshed tears. "Just a little misunderstanding. Your friends took care of it." Later, after the ceremony, after the flurry of congratulations and photographs, Jalen received a call from Chancellor Raren himself, apologizing profusely for the incident. The story, captured on several cell phones, had gone viral, prompting a wave of online outrage and a swift response from the university. Danielle, suddenly thrust into the spotlight, became an unlikely symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, even in the face of institutional indifference. But for Danielle, the victory wasn't about the public apology or the viral video. It was about the unwavering support of her son, the fierce loyalty of his brothers in arms, and the quiet understanding that, in the face of adversity, the bonds of family and friendship are the strongest armor of all. The air, thick with the anticipatory murmur of the crowd, crackled with a tension that hadn't been there moments before. The two security guards, their faces now a mottled mix of red and white, shifted their weight uneasily. Danielle's grip on her purse tightened. Her knuckles, white against the worn leather, mirrored the rigid set of her jaw. "They thought they could move me." The thought, sharp and cold, echoed the glint in her eyes. She hadn't moved an inch. Not an inch. The phantom weight of Jalen's hand on her shoulder, from when he was a boy, steadied her more than any apology ever could. The sudden shift in the guard's demeanor hadn't escaped her notice. Their initial bravado, fueled by their perceived authority, had evaporated like morning mist under the unwavering gaze of 6 Navy SEALs. They hadn't expected this. Nobody expects a mother's love to deploy like a tactical unit. A wry, internal smile touched her lips. The world often underestimated mothers. They saw softness, vulnerability. They didn't see the steel forged in sleepless nights, in anxious prayers, in fierce protection. A woman in a crisp maroon blazer, her name tag identifying her as university staff, hurried towards Danielle, her face a mask of professional apology. "Ma'am, I am so incredibly sorry for this misunderstanding. We've reserved a seat for you closer to the stage. Please, allow me to escort you." Danielle met her gaze, her expression unreadable. "The seat's fine." Her voice, though quiet, carried an undeniable weight. This wasn't about the seat. It never had been. It was about respect, about recognizing that a mother's place was wherever her son wanted her to be. It was about seeing her, truly seeing her, not as an anomaly, an inconvenience, but as a human being deserving of dignity. The staff member faltered, her practiced smile slipping. But this seat," she gestured vaguely towards the now empty seats flanking Danielle, occupied just moments ago by imposing figures, "is, well, it's where my son wanted me to sit," Danielle finished, her voice unwavering. The murmur in the crowd had intensified, now laced with whispers of, "Did you see that?" And those were Navy SEALs. The air thrummed with a strange mix of awe and indignation. The woman in the maroon blazer, clearly out of her depth, stammered another apology before retreating, leaving Danielle flanked by the silent support of the crowd. The incident, a small crack in the veneer of normalcy, had exposed something deeper, something unsettling. The processional music began, a grand, sweeping melody that attempted to smooth over the jagged edges of the preceding moments. But the tension remained, a palpable hum beneath the surface. The world, Danielle realized, was watching. Not just this small stadium filled with graduates and their families, but the wider world, connected by the invisible threads of social media. The incident, already captured and shared, was rippling outwards, a testament to the quiet power of resistance. Jalen's eyes met hers as he walked past, his face a mixture of pride and concern. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared victory. He saw me. That's all that matters. The ceremony proceeded, a blur of speeches and accolades. Danielle barely heard them. Her focus remained laser-sharp on Jalen, her heart swelling with a fierce, unwavering pride. He had done it. He had overcome so much, and here he was, standing tall, ready to embrace the future. As Jalen crossed the stage, his name called out, a wave of applause erupted. Danielle clapped, her hands aching, tears blurring her vision. My son, my brilliant, beautiful son. Later, amidst the throng of well-wishers, a middle-aged woman in a navy blue dress approached Danielle, her eyes shining with admiration. Congratulations on your son, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Everyone's talking about him. Danielle managed a small smile. Thank you. They just didn't see him, the woman continued, shaking her head. They didn't see the man he is, the sacrifices he's made. They just saw her voice trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Danielle knew what she meant. They hadn't seen Jalen. They hadn't seen her. They had seen only what they expected to see, blinded by their own preconceptions. But now the world saw them, truly saw them. And that, she realized, was a victory worth fighting for. The next day, Chancellor Rarin personally contacted Jalen, extending a profuse apology for the incident. The university issued a public statement, acknowledging their failure and promising to review their security protocols. The story went viral, sparking a national conversation about implicit bias and institutional prejudice. Danielle, thrust into the spotlight, became an unlikely symbol of resilience and quiet defiance. She hadn't sought this attention, this platform, but now that she had it, she wouldn't shy away from it. She would use her voice to speak for those who were often unseen, unheard. She would ensure that no other mother had to fight for her rightful place beside her child. The fight, she knew, was far from over. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had stood her ground, and she had won. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns, the air still vibrating with the echoes of applause and the rustle of departing gowns. Danielle Merriweather stood beneath a sprawling oak, its leaves whispering secrets to the breeze. Her heart, moments ago a tight knot of anxiety and indignation, now throbbed with a strange mixture of relief and something akin to disbelief. It was over. Jalen had graduated. He was an engineer. Her, Jalen. She smoothed a hand over the simple navy dress she'd chosen, the fabric still warm from the sun, her fingers tracing the outline of the ticket stub tucked safely in her purse. A worthless piece of paper, it seemed, until those 6 imposing figures had materialized like avenging angels. Danielle closed her eyes, the image of Hawk, face grim, eyes blazing, stepping forward, still vivid. And Trevor Banks, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced with a steely resolve. They hadn't needed to say a word. Their presence had spoken volumes. A mother's silent plea answered by the unwavering loyalty of her son's brothers-in-arms. Mom, Jalen's voice, warm and laced with concern, pulled her back to the present. He stood before her, his graduation gown billowing slightly in the gentle breeze, a mixture of pride and something else anger, flickering in his eyes. Jalen. Danielle reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, the faint prickle of his newly grown beard beneath her touch. You did it. He captured her hand, his grip tight. I saw what happened, Mom. I saw everything. His voice was low, controlled. Inside, a tempest raged. He'd envisioned this day for so long, his mother proudly watching from the seat he'd secured for her. Instead, he'd been forced to witness the insidious poison of prejudice attempting to mar this sacred moment. He had wanted to storm out, to confront the guards, to demand an explanation. But the ceremony, his years of hard work, he couldn't let their bigotry taint his achievement. He'd had to wait. "It's okay, Jalen," Danielle murmured, her thumb stroking the back of his hand. "It's over now." She didn't want him to carry this burden. This day was his. He shook his head, a muscle twitching in his cheek. "No, Mom, it's not okay. It's never okay." A young man in a green graduation gown approached hesitantly, his face a mixture of awe and admiration. "Mr. Merriweather?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw the whole thing. I didn't move. I stayed." His words tumbled out, a jumble of emotions he couldn't quite articulate. He'd witnessed something profound, something that had resonated deep within his young soul. The quiet dignity of a mother facing injustice. The unwavering loyalty of brothers. The slow but steady awakening of conscience in the faces of the onlookers. He'd felt a surge of helplessness, a burning shame, and then, finally, a flicker of hope. Jalen looked at the young man, his gaze softening. He saw the genuine respect in his eyes, the unspoken apology for the ugliness he'd witnessed. He placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You didn't have to. You earned that seat a long time ago." His voice, though still tinged with residual anger, held a note of weary understanding. This wasn't just about his mother. It was about everyone who had ever been unjustly judged, dismissed, or marginalized. The courtyard buzzed with a low hum of conversation, whispers turning to murmurs, murmurs to open discussions. Someone had filmed the entire incident. By the time they reached the car, Jalen's phone was vibrating incessantly with notifications. The video had gone viral. The drive home was a blur. Danielle stared out the window, the passing scenery a hazy backdrop to her swirling thoughts. The events of the day played on repeat in her mind, each replay bringing a new wave of emotion. Humiliation, anger, pride. She felt the weight of the collective gaze, the silent judgment, the unspoken assumptions. But she also felt the warmth of the unexpected support, the solidarity of strangers, the fierce protectiveness of her son and his friends. Back at the house, the family gathered, a quiet haven amidst the storm brewing outside. Jalen's sister, Maya, hugged Danielle tightly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," she whispered. "You were amazing." Later that evening, Jalen received a call from Chancellor Raren himself, his voice choked with apology and regret. The university was launching an internal investigation. The security guards were being questioned. A formal apology would be issued. The incident had become a catalyst, sparking a much-needed conversation about implicit bias and institutional prejudice. Danielle sat on the porch swing, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle, a sweet, familiar fragrance that grounded her in the present. The events of the day felt surreal, like a dream. But the lingering warmth in her heart, the unwavering support of her family, the quiet strength she discovered within herself, these were real. She closed her eyes, a small smile playing on her lips. She had earned that seat, not just at the graduation ceremony, but in life itself. And no one, no matter their authority or prejudice, could ever take that away from her. The fight for justice, for equality, for simple human decency was far from over. But tonight, under the watchful gaze of the stars, Danielle Merriweather allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. The muted hum of the air conditioner was the only sound in the hotel room, a stark contrast to the roaring applause and the swell of pride that had filled the stadium just hours ago. Danielle Merriweather sat on the edge of the bed, the crimson graduation program clutched in her hand, its edges softened from being held so tightly. It felt surreal. The ceremony, the guards, the sudden appearance of Jalen Seal brothers, it played in her mind like a film reel, each frame etched with a mixture of disbelief and a simmering anger that refused to fully ignite. Jalen, her son, her pride, was sprawled on the other bed, his phone illuminating his face with an eerie blue glow. He chuckled softly, a sound that usually warmed her heart, but tonight it pricked at her unease. "It's everywhere, Mom. Everywhere." He turned the screen towards her, and Danielle saw a grainy video of the incident playing out, different angles, different perspectives, all converging on one undeniable truth. The guards, their faces stiff and unyielding, their hands on her arm. Her own face, a mask of controlled fury, the way she held her ground. The arrival of the SEALs, a wave of solid muscle and quiet menace, the way they formed a protective circle around her. Then the murmurs, the rising tide of outrage from the crowd. The tightness in her chest returned, a constricting band of something akin to shame. Shame that this had happened. Shame that it had to be witnessed, dissected, and shared by thousands of unseen eyes. "Turn it off, Jalen," she murmured, her voice raspy. "Please." He obliged, the sudden darkness amplifying the silence. "They're calling it Mama Bear versus the system," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "You're trending, Mom. You're officially a social media legend." Danielle closed her eyes, the absurdity of it all pressing down on her. A legend? For being treated like a criminal at her own son's graduation? The bitter irony made her stomach churn. She wasn't looking for fame, for recognition. All she wanted was to be there for her son, to witness his triumph, a moment they had both worked so hard for. This public spectacle felt like a violation, a stripping bare of a private moment that had been tarnished by prejudice. "I don't understand," she whispered, more to herself than to Jalen. "Why? Why me?" Jalen sat up, the bed springs creaking beneath him. He crossed the room and sat beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. The familiar weight, the warmth of his touch, was a grounding force in the swirling chaos of her thoughts. "It's not you, Mom," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "It's them. It's the way they see us. They see a black woman, a veteran's mother, and they make assumptions. They think they can push us around, that we won't fight back." His words resonated with a painful truth. She had felt it, the subtle dismissal in their eyes, the casual disrespect in their tone, the assumption that she didn't belong. A lifetime of such encounters flashed before her eyes, a montage of microaggressions, each one a tiny cut that had scarred over, leaving behind a residue of resentment. This was different. This was a public wound, exposed for all to see. A soft knock on the door broke the silence. Jalen rose to answer it, his shoulders squared, his movements radiating a quiet strength she had always admired. He returned a moment later, his expression unreadable. "It's the university chancellor," he said. "He wants to talk to you." A wave of weariness washed over Danielle. She didn't want to talk. She wanted to disappear, to erase the day from her memory. "Tell him I'm busy," she said, her voice flat. "I got dinner in 30 minutes and a life to live after that." Jalen relayed the message, his lips twitching slightly as he spoke to the unseen figure on the other side of the door. He returned, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "He insists, says it's important." Danielle sighed, a deep, shuddering exhale. She knew she couldn't avoid it. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Jalen, about the countless others who had faced similar indignities. "Fine," she said, rising to her feet. "Let him in." The chancellor, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and a carefully cultivated air of contrition, entered the room, extending a hand towards Danielle. "Mrs. Merriweather," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, "I am so deeply sorry for what transpired today. There is no excuse for the way you were treated. We have already placed the security guards on administrative leave pending a full investigation." Danielle looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. She didn't take his hand. "An apology is a start," she said, her voice steady. "But it doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't change the fact that my son's graduation, a day that should have been filled with joy, was marred by prejudice." The chancellor's face flushed slightly, his composure momentarily faltering. He recovered quickly, however, his voice regaining its polished tone. We understand that, Mrs. Merriweather. We want to make amends. We'd like to offer you a formal, public apology. We're also prepared to make a significant donation in your name to a charity of your choice. Danielle considered his offer, the silence stretching between them. The air conditioner continued its monotonous hum, a steady backdrop to the churning emotions within her. She wasn't interested in their money, their apologies, their attempts to smooth over the ugliness of the day. She wanted something more, something that would resonate beyond the fleeting outrage of social media. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the hotel window, painting the room in a warm, golden hue. Danielle sat on the edge of the bed, a cup of lukewarm coffee in her hand, her gaze fixed on the cityscape stretching out before her. She had made her decision. Jalen entered the room, his face etched with a mixture of apprehension and pride. "They're here," he said. "The news crew. Are you ready?" Danielle took a deep breath, the scent of coffee filling her lungs. "I am," she said, her voice firm. "I have something to say." She walked towards the door, her steps steady, her shoulders back, the weight of the past and the hope for the future converging within her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her son, about his legacy, and about the generations to come who deserved a world free from prejudice and discrimination. It was time to speak. The aroma of roasted coffee beans, a comforting, familiar scent, swirled around Danielle Merriweather like a warm embrace. Bakersfield, her hometown, felt different today. The air seemed to hum with a strange energy, a blend of excitement and disbelief. The small coffee shop, usually a haven of quiet murmurs and the clatter of ceramic mugs, buzzed with an unusual intensity. A young woman with keen eyes and a voice recorder sat opposite her, her notepad filled with scribbled notes. The interview had begun, but Danielle felt as if she were still processing the events of the previous day. Graduation day, a day meant for celebration, for pride, a day that had almost been stolen from her. "Mrs. Merriweather," the journalist began, her voice soft yet professional. "Can you describe the moment the security guards approached you?" Danielle took a slow sip of her coffee, the warmth spreading through her chest. The bitter taste mirrored the residue of anger that still lingered. Why me? She'd thought at the time. Out of all the parents, why single me out? The guards' faces, their expressions of officious authority, flashed before her eyes. "They were polite, at first," she answered, her voice steady despite the turmoil that stirred within her. Polite but condescending. That unspoken layer of their interaction, the subtle implication that she didn't belong, was what had truly stung. "They asked to see my ticket. I showed it to them." She remembered the crisp paper in her hand, the designated seat number clearly printed, proof of her right to be there. Yet it hadn't been enough. And then, the journalist prompted, her pen poised above the notepad. "Then they told me there must be a mistake, that my ticket wasn't valid for that section." Danielle's fingers tightened around the warm ceramic mug. She could still feel the tremor in her hand from yesterday, the physical manifestation of the rising tide of indignation. A mistake? How could there be a mistake? Jalen had personally ensured she had a prime seat. His pride in her, his desire to see her beaming from the front row, had fueled his meticulous planning. The thought of his disappointment had been a sharp, painful pang in her heart. What went through your mind at that moment? Danielle paused, searching for the words to capture the complex whirlwind of emotions. Humiliation had pricked at her. Anger had simmered. But deeper than that, a quiet resolve had solidified. She wouldn't be moved. Not today. Not for this. "I knew I was in the right," she said finally, her voice low but firm. "I knew Jalen wouldn't have made a mistake." The unspoken addendum hung in the air. "And I knew I deserved to be there, just like any other parent." And then, the journalist leaned forward, her eyes shining with an intensity that mirrored the nation's sudden fascination with Danielle's story. "Your son's friends arrived." The word friends felt inadequate. These men, Jalen's former Navy SEAL teammates, were more than friends. They were brothers, forged in shared experiences, bound by unwavering loyalty. Danielle remembered the moment they appeared, 6 figures in civilian clothes, their presence radiating a quiet strength that shifted the atmosphere. Hawk, with a steady gaze and reassuring presence, had simply nodded at her. Trevor Banks, his usual playful grin replaced by a serious set to his jaw, had placed a hand on her shoulder. A silent promise of support. "No one touches Mama Merriweather," she could almost hear him saying. That moment, the unspoken declaration of solidarity, had sent a ripple through the crowd. The guard's initial confidence had wavered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. "It was that surreal," Danielle admitted, a small smile playing on her lips. The memory of the stunned silence followed by the growing murmurs of the crowd brought a sense of almost absurd amusement. She'd become an unwitting symbol, a focal point of something larger than herself. "Mrs. Merriweather, your story has gone viral. People are calling you a hero, a symbol of resistance." The journalist's voice held a note of awe. Danielle's smile faded. "I didn't stay because I was trying to prove anything," she said softly, her gaze drifting to the window, where the everyday life of Bakersfield continued, oblivious to the storm her simple act had created. "I stayed because I belonged, because my son earned that moment, and I earned the right to witness it." The journalist nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "Sometimes," she said, a thoughtful expression on her face, "resistance looks like sitting still." Danielle's words echoed in the quiet of the coffee shop, resonating with a truth that transcended the specific incident. It was a truth about dignity, about knowing one's worth, about refusing to be moved from the space one rightfully occupies. The university had issued a public apology. Chancellor Raren himself had contacted Jalen, expressing his regret and assuring him that a full investigation would be conducted. The two security guards had been placed on administrative leave. But for Danielle, the true victory wasn't in the apologies or the disciplinary actions. It was in the quiet affirmation of her own self-worth. It was in the unwavering support she'd received, not just from Jalen's teammates, but from the middle-aged woman in the navy blue dress who'd first questioned the guards, the young man in the green graduation gown who'd offered her a comforting smile, the countless strangers now sharing her story, amplifying her voice. It was in the realization that sometimes the most powerful act of defiance is simply refusing to be erased. The Charlotte air hung thick and heavy, the humidity clinging to Danielle like a second skin. The news had broken. It spread like wildfire, first a flicker on local news outlets, then a blaze across social media, engulfing the nation in its heat. The video, shaky and pixelated, yet undeniably powerful, played on an endless loop the two security guards, their faces now grimly familiar, flanking her, their words muffled but their intent clear. Danielle, seemingly small in her simple dress, yet radiating an unwavering strength, refusing to budge. Then, the arrival of the SEALs, a silent, imposing wall of support. The contrast was stark, a visual representation of David and Goliath. She hadn't meant for it to become a spectacle. She had simply wanted to sit in the seat her son had reserved for her. A small, ordinary wish that had blossomed into an extraordinary act of defiance. Inside her modest brick house, the phone rang incessantly. Journalists, activists, even distant relatives she hadn't spoken to in years, all clamored for a piece of her story. Danielle let the answering machine pick up the calls. The buzzing of the machine was a dull throb against the quiet hum of her thoughts. She sat by the window, a cup of lukewarm tea forgotten in her hand, watching the world outside react to her private struggle. It was surreal. This small act, this quiet resistance, had become a symbol, a rallying cry against injustice. She felt a strange disconnect, as if the Danielle Merriweather on the screen was a different person entirely, a woman she barely recognized. A formal apology from the university arrived via email, stiff and impersonal. It acknowledged the unfortunate incident and promised a thorough investigation. The security guards the email stated had been reassigned. A hollow victory, Danielle thought. Reassigned, not held accountable, not forced to confront the prejudice that had fueled their actions. Later that day, a university staff member, a woman in a crisp maroon blazer, arrived at Danielle's doorstep. She introduced herself with a practiced smile, her words carefully chosen, expressing deep regret and extending an invitation to a private luncheon with Chancellor Rarin. Danielle listened patiently, her gaze fixed on a chip paint fleck on the woman's perfectly manicured nails. The woman's perfume, a cloying floral scent, filled the small living room, a stark contrast to the lingering aroma of Danielle's own Simple Hand soap. "Thank you for the offer," Danielle finally said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I must decline." The woman's smile faltered. There was a flicker of surprise in her eyes, a momentary crack in the polished facade. She hadn't expected to be refused. Danielle could almost hear the woman's internal monologue, a scramble to regain control, to understand this unexpected resistance. "Mrs. Merriweather, the Chancellor is very eager to speak with you," the woman persisted, her voice taking on a slightly pleading tone. "I appreciate that," Danielle replied, her expression unchanged. "But my son's graduation was yesterday. That was the only event I cared about attending." The woman's smile finally dissolved completely, replaced by a thin, tight line. She mumbled something about understanding and retreated, the click of her heels on the pavement, a sharp punctuation mark to the end of the conversation. The phone calls continued, relentless. Finally, she unplugged the answering machine, the sudden silence a welcome relief. The weight of the public's attention was suffocating. She had never sought the spotlight. She simply wanted to be a mother, to celebrate her son's achievements. Jalen called, his voice thick with emotion. He told her about the outpouring of support, the messages from strangers, the veterans' groups offering their solidarity. Chancellor Rarin had called him personally, offering a profuse apology. Jalen had accepted the apology, not for himself, but for his mother. "They want to give you an honorary degree, Mom," he said, a hint of disbelief in his voice. Danielle chuckled softly. An honorary degree. It seemed absurd. All she had done was sit. "Tell them I appreciate the gesture," she said, "but I'm not interested." She could almost see Jalen smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was amused. He knew her too well. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a visitor arrived. It was Hawk, one of Jalen's former teammates, his presence as solid and reassuring as the oak tree in Danielle's front yard. He sat with her on the porch swing, the gentle creak of the chains a comforting rhythm in the twilight. They spoke little, their silence filled with an understanding that transcended words. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle, a sweet, familiar fragrance that grounded Danielle, reminding her of simpler times. "You remind me of my son," Hawk finally said, his voice low and gravelly. He paused, his gaze fixed on the fireflies blinking in the deepening dusk. "I hope that's a good thing." Danielle smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "It is," she assured him. "Sometimes," she said, her voice soft but clear, "resistance looks like sitting still." Hawk nodded, his eyes meeting hers. In that shared moment of understanding, Danielle realized that her quiet act of defiance had reverberated far beyond the confines of the university stadium. It had touched a chord, awakened a conscience, and sparked a conversation that desperately needed to be had. It was a reminder that even the smallest act of courage, the simplest refusal to yield, could ignite a flame of hope, a beacon of change in a world that often felt shrouded in darkness. And in the quiet stillness of that summer evening, Danielle found a strange, unexpected peace. The roar of the crowd was a tidal wave, crashing over Danielle. A sea of faces, blurred with distance, swayed and shifted like kelp forests beneath a restless current. The sun beat down on her, a warm hand on her neck, but a chill still lingered, a phantom echo of the icy dread that had gripped her only moments before. She could still feel the hard plastic of the chair beneath her, the unsettling pressure of the security guard's hand on her arm. But now a different kind of pressure warmed her, a solid presence at her side. Jalen. He stood before her, his graduation gown billowing slightly in the breeze, the black fabric a stark contrast to the bright sunlight reflecting off his meticulously polished shoes. His eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, were now filled with a profound, almost unsettling intensity. He reached out, his strong hands engulfing hers. For a moment, the noise faded, the crowd disappeared, and it was just the two of them, adrift in a silent, sun-drenched world. "Mom," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Pride? Relief? Something deeper, something she hadn't seen before. It resonated within her, a low hum that vibrated in her very bones. Danielle's own throat constricted. Words felt inadequate, flimsy things against the weight of the moment. She'd rehearsed this day in her mind 1,000 times. Imagined the perfect things to say, the witty remarks, the heartfelt congratulations. But now all that vanished, leaving behind a raw, aching vulnerability. All she could manage was a shaky, "You did it." He pulled her into a hug, his arms tight around her, and the world snapped back into focus, the roar of the crowd returning, amplified, it seemed, by the pounding of her own heart. The scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the faint perfume of the woman standing beside her, a silent witness to this small, private moment in the midst of public chaos. Danielle closed her eyes, burying her face in her son's shoulder, the rough fabric of his gown a comforting texture against her cheek. She breathed in his scent, a familiar mix of soap and something indefinably him, and a wave of exhaustion washed over her, the accumulated stress of the past hour finally releasing its grip. He pulled back slightly, his hands resting on her shoulders, his gaze searching hers. "You didn't have to," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, but every word resonated with an intensity that made the surrounding noise fade into background static. "You were in that seat a long time ago." Danielle's breath hitched. She knew what he meant. Not just the seat, not just this ceremony. He was talking about everything. The years of sacrifice, the late nights, the worries, the unwavering belief in him, even when he doubted himself. All the invisible battles she fought, the silent anxieties she carried, just so he could have this moment. A tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek. She brushed it away, embarrassed, but he simply smiled, a small, almost sad smile that tugged at something deep within her. This is something I didn't even know how to pray for," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You made it." His grip tightened on her shoulders. "We made it," he corrected gently, his eyes shining with an emotion that mirrored her own. Later, in the quiet sanctuary of their hotel room, the events of the day replayed in Danielle's mind like a fragmented film reel. The guards' faces, the murmur of the crowd, the sudden appearance of Jalen's teammates, the woman in the navy blue dress who had dared to speak up, the young man in the green gown who offered her a comforting smile, each image flashed before her, sharp and vivid. She thought about Chancellor Rieren's phone call, his stammering apologies, his promises of a full investigation. It was more than she had expected, more than she had even hoped for. But it wasn't the apology that resonated most deeply. It was the groundswell of support, the unexpected allies who had materialized out of the crowd, the ripple effect of a single act of defiance. Jalen sat across from her, scrolling through his phone, a small smile playing on his lips. He showed her a video, shaky and grainy, taken by someone in the crowd. It showed the entire incident, from the guards' initial approach to the arrival of the SEALs, their silent, imposing presence a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the crowd. The comments scrolling beneath the video were a torrent of outrage, support, and disbelief. The incident had gone viral. "Look at this, Mom," Jalen said, his voice filled with a quiet wonder. "People are talking about it. They re angry." Danielle watched the video, a strange mix of emotions swirling within her. Pride, yes, but also a profound sadness, a recognition of the deep-seated biases that still existed, the invisible barriers that separated people, the casual cruelties that often went unnoticed, unchallenged. And yet, a flicker of hope ignited within her, fueled by the outpouring of support. the collective voice rising in protest. "The world doesn't change by accident," she said softly, her gaze meeting Jalen's. "It changes when ordinary people decide they belong." He nodded, a slow, thoughtful nod that spoke volumes. He closed his phone, the screen going dark, reflecting their faces back at them, two individuals bound by blood and circumstance who had, in their own small way, become a part of something larger, something more profound. They had taken a stand, not for fame or recognition, but for the simple, undeniable right to belong. And in that moment, in the quiet stillness of the hotel room, Danielle understood that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance can create the most powerful waves of change. The ripples were already spreading, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that they would continue to expand, reaching far beyond the confines of that graduation ceremony, touching lives in ways they could never have imagined.